Well, while we get that slide deck going, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thriving Together NCW's first learning session of the year. My name is Veronica Farias. I am the Director of Network Development at Thriving Together NCW. And joining me are Sarah Bates, our Data Director, our Executive Director, John Chapman, and our partners at Community Initiatives, Stacey and Monty. Today, we're kicking off this virtual learning series with a focus on belonging and civic muscle. As John mentioned, so we are recording these and they will be available for partners in a follow-up email and on our YouTube channel. For those of you who weren't able to join us today, obviously, or for those of you that need to jump off early for any reason. And then thank you all for being here today. And thank you for joining our efforts in building thriving communities across North Central Washington. All right. So during today's learning session, our goals are to build an understanding of what that belonging and civic muscle even means. Some of you that have joined the network since we first launched the partner agreement last year, you've heard about the vital conditions framework. But to those of you who are who've not officially joined the network and are newer to this framework, please stay tuned. I promise you will feel inspired by the end of today's session. So we'll get to hear from national leaders and local partners who are cultivating skills in belonging and civic muscle and offering spaces as such across the region. And then finally, we hope that today's session can identify some opportunities for us all, not only to belong and hold space for others to feel that they belong, but also to exercise their civic muscle. Next slide. So before we jump into today's content, I'd like to offer a quick view at our time together. As I read through today's agenda, please feel free to enter your name and your organization in the chat or rename yourself so that we can see who's sharing space with us today. And then we will have an opportunity to revisit what we heard from our summit last year. You will get to hear from John about why it's important to build belonging and civic muscle, particularly in this moment in time. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll get to hear from a few national and community voices, including Harry Boyd from the Institute of Public Life and Work, Marichuy Alvizar from Unidos Nueva Alianza, and Nancy Warner, who is a key partner in building belonging and civic muscle across the region, and most recently with their efforts in building a local chapter. And then we'll dive into some community conversation, and I will wrap up our time together with the preview on what's ahead for the network and for this learning series. Next slide. All right, so for those of you who joined our summit last year and were able to partake in some of the breakouts and dialogues that took place, a lot of this will be very familiar. These 5 key bucket areas were certainly what was most prevalent among the conversations that took place. Communications and listening, building relationship and trust, conflict resolution and healing, cultural inclusiveness and practices, and building safe spaces. So we will dive into what some of this looks like across the nation and locally, what we're doing across the region as we continue to dive into these opportunities that were lifted and stemmed out of that summit. And I'll turn it over to John for some few words.
Quickly, again, just kind of really the goal of today and the goal of focus is really around that shared understanding of language. This is really a great opportunity for us to learn together and discuss together what it means to be in a space where we're focusing and promoting belonging and civic muscle, and how that looks for our region in North Central Washington and the partners and how we engage together. And see the quote on the screen and you saw some of the key themes of how important it is to lean into this work that came out of our summit last fall. And this quote is great because you think of belonging and civic muscle and you really go to that concept of, civic muscle and muscle, right? We all know that, you do one workout, you don't become this star athlete or, you don't get into shape just by walking down the street. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort, it takes practice, and it to really, flex and build those muscles. And that's the same way with belonging and civic muscle. It takes time, energy, and effort to do that. And I think, with everything going on in the world today, with the struggle we see in the national politics, and even sometimes state politics, and the divisiveness around it, it's really important for us as a region to understand that locally we're all in it together, and we want to figure out ways to continue to support and flex that muscle together. We'll hear from local partners and national partners, but I think that key theme of how we, with differing sides, differing opinions, differing ways of doing this work, can focus on how we include everyone into these discussions, work as a community to move this work forward, and continuing to flex that, knowing that we may not get it perfect every time and it takes practice, is really important. And developing that skill and developing it together will also make all the other work we do around vital conditions and thriving that much more effective and that much more important. And so that's why centering in this space and focusing it on this work, and that's why this being the center of the vital conditions wheel is an important start to the year as we move forward into this. And I'm going to turn it over to Monty to jump into some of the other slides. But again, thank you all for being part of this and looking forward to learning throughout the session. Next slide.
Thanks, John and Veronica, yeah, for kicking us off. I, think you nailed it. Just as John was saying, in the middle of this, set of vital conditions, this kind of holistic way of seeing our communities, our country, the world, that these vital conditions, as we know, that every human being, no matter where they are, need in order to thrive, in order to reach their full potential. And the center of that is belonging to civic muscle, which is, as John was suggesting, it's something that we all need. We're wired for belonging. We're wired for connection. And it naturally, frankly, we're also wired for contribution and to use our civic muscle in our communities. And I think we're wired to do that in a ways that make it possible for other people to thrive and to make sure that everybody has a chance to reach their full potential. And that's really the ethos of what this network has been about. And I thought, there were some beautiful expressions of that in that previous slide when we were looking at kind of being together, just kind of how important that is to anchor ourselves in our relationships. The leaders doing the land acknowledgement said, we are each other's medicine, and we are each other's medicine always, and particularly in these moments that sometimes feel a little bit fraught. So next slide. This is a quote from, some of you recognize, the former Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, who really has brought great attention to kind of the importance of social connection and how it underlies our possibilities, and how we have some forces in some ways that are causing us to, in some ways, feel more disconnected, and that this is really one of the urgent matters of the day. So belonging and civic muscle that travel together, an ins and a means of both of those things, is why this conversation is so important and why this network has already identified it as a priority. My colleague Stacy, these are difficult times, and there are some headwinds in some ways that are really challenging our ability to think about belonging and civic muscle, and fragmenting us in some ways. So Stacy, I don't know if you want to maybe just touch on these. You're on mute if you're.
Excellent. Thanks, Monty. Yeah, and John and Veronica, as each of you have named sort of in your own way, right? There are these cultural forces that are sort of really bending our connection sort of in a direction of moving away from one another. Many of us are familiar with a number of these forces, and just to realize sort of the stacking, the amplifying that's occurring with social disconnection, everything from our increased mobility as Americans. We move more often and stay in places less time. Social media that's reshaping our interaction. Of course, COVID-19 really broadened or sort of grew that disconnection. And some of the simpler things like, us sort of losing our sort of opportunity to practice and sort of our capacity to really sit in open dialogue with one another. Of course, this sort of disconnection didn't just start with COVID, that being sort of one of the more recent and substantive pieces, but sort of everyday headlines, right, from, again, the social media challenges. But if we actually look at the trends over time and can see that church membership has been dropping, social trust has been dropping since the 1970s. And as we think about like loneliness, social disconnection, we often, again, through the headlines, see general numbers. But like all data, when we're able to parse that data out and kind of look more closely, we're able to see that, those across our community, different members are differently situated in that and are experiencing loneliness at different rates, as well as with different barriers, if you will. And so when we think about our neighbors and family who are people who live with disabilities, they may have more or greater barriers of access or financial insecurity. Our rural neighbors may often experience more of digital exclusion or transportation challenges. And so each of these sort of data points, if you will, can help sort of point us in the direction, along with our shared stories and experiences to what we might do together to change those wins. So as we think about the different ways that we can bring together, our collective community forces to really shift that, to bring us back together, to move from isolation toward belonging, to move from mistrust to trust, and from fragmentation to shared action. There are innumerable things that we can do, and we'll get to hear a little bit more about what's occurring that is helping to bridge those divides as we go forward together today. But just a quick touch on a few highlights, if you will. Really, the first is often just understanding really the power of social connection and our collective risks, our individual and collective risk of disconnection. That opportunity, as we're doing today, and as many of the community partners are growing our interpersonal skills, again, growing our capacity for active living or active listening, empathy, bridging. Really making time for civic engagement and shared purpose, the way we design our spaces to be inclusive, that foster safe relationships across differences, and really expanding opportunities for each to express our purpose, to move together in shared service and shared action. And there's much reason really to be hopeful, in that a recent series of studies, reflected that more than 70% of Americans feel that we have a responsibility to connect with those who are different from us, who have different backgrounds and different viewpoints. And nearly 70% of Americans believe that we have something to learn from one another. And perhaps most important, that those who reported both the social responsibility as well as a belief in our ability to learn from one another said that what was most important to them is an interest in activities where we have the opportunity to work together to advance issues, in our own communities. And so we look forward to hearing more about some of that work going on later today. And Monty, I'll hand that back over to you as we can hear from some of our guests.
Great. And I think the next slide that we have three different voices and want to just jump right in, starting with Harry, who is a community voice who happens to be a national community voice and well known in the space of democracy building and civic life and bridging. And so, Harry, it's great to have you join this group this morning and would love maybe just to start off. You have a really interesting history in with the civil rights movement and actual work with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., you and your father, and wondering if you want to maybe just share a little bit around how some of those earlier years and experiences shape the way you think about belonging in civic muscle. So welcome.
Thanks, Monty. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been hearing about the Northwest Central Washington group. And it was really good to begin to connect with the local and regional groups. And I should say, I've been in conversation with Monty and Bobby Milstein and others in this network for a long time. And we've shared a lot of insights. And as I think you'll see today, our perspective is not identical, but it's very overlapping and synergistic. Yeah, my background was as a kid, I grew up in Georgia. My father was head of the Red Cross and then became active in school desegregation. Southern Scottish American family. He well, he had some tough times when he was doing desegregation work, but King asked him to become on his staff as the first white person in 1963. And I was just turning 18. And then worked on and off. So Dad worked for SCLC, and I worked on and off as a field secretary in what were called the citizenship schools. And I'll give a bit more on that and the background to those. And so I've been continuing that work around the kind of what we call an aspirational understanding of citizenship, not a legalistic. And then developing concepts and practices and initiatives that further that. Today I'll be talking about the idea of citizen professionals who kind of regrow a bigger understanding of their work than simply their particular discipline, see themselves as community builders. We think that's actually key to developing belonging in civic muscle and expanding democracy again. It's the shrinking of civic identities has had a lot to do with the shrinking of the understanding of democracy. So I'll talk about that today. I should say that actually, well, I'll mention it, but we see this kind of civil rights movement spirit or the freedom spirit renewing in a coalition of historically Black colleges in Texas. Key organizer has been one of my former students, Robert Saressa and his students at Houston Tillotson. And they really are they're on a tear. They're just gotten the HBCU caucus, the first one in a legislature in Texas, and they've just have a bill for citizenship school work across the state through HBCUs that just got out of committee in the Texas legislature. So they're working not only with Democrats, but with Republicans on that.
That's great. Harry, thank you for that. And by the way, I think Stacy has your slides. So if there's
Yeah, is there some way I can do it, Stacy, or should I just say move on? Stacy, yeah.
Just prompt me with next whenever you're ready.
Okay, good, I'll do that. So this comes out of our work with the Institute for Public Life and Work. And before that, for many years, I directed something called the Center for Democracy and Citizenship, which was very much in the world. It was based at the Humphrey Institute and the University of Minnesota, but we did projects in the US and around the world. Mari, we met through our work. She was director of education for a very significant democracy group in South Africa that worked across the continent. So in all of this work, we've seen democracy not simply as elections, but most importantly as a way of life. That was definitely the message that I got as a young man working for the movement for Martin Luther King. This is a good quote from Vincent Harding, the late Vincent Harding, who was a wonderful leader and a great friend of King, and also sometimes speechwriter for Martin Luther King. But as he said in his Hope and History, democracy was a living concept and way of life in the movement. The movement itself demonstrated a chapter in the struggle. Okay, next. Stacy, you can go next to the next slide. So what's been happening? I mean, democracy has been shrinking. None of the candidates on either side of the election last year talked about democracy as a way of life, and none of them mentioned citizenship. Now, this was in contrast to the, say, the Obama campaign in 2008 or the George Bush campaign in the early 2000s, both of whom talked about citizenship all the time. So what's been shrinking? Well, our own research and study in a lot of settings, a lot of institutions, and a lot of communities shows that the understanding of professionals has shrunk to narrowly disciplinary professionals. And this actually has a lot to do with the culture of the elite universities that set the pace. We have a lot of research that shows that the identities of faculty have narrowed to their particular discipline, and increasingly they see themselves as not part of local civic life. And then they pass on that narrowed identity to professions. So the way we think this can be pushed back against, changed in higher education, but also in communities, is through what we call citizen professional. I'll tell some stories about that today. But it overcomes detachment if professionals see themselves as part of communities, not apart from communities, if they see themselves as working with fellow citizens, not working on them or for them, to build communities where everyone thrives. And this is a key point, and this is in addition to the belonging and civic muscle, I would say. Citizen professionals work in political ways, not a partisan understanding of politics, but the old ancient understanding of politics is dealing with people who are different in a public space, which is diverse and plural and not always safe. It's complicated, but it is working with a deep respect for the talents and the energies and different knowledges that people have, whatever their credentials or whatever their formal educational level. Stacy, next. Now, in the freedom movement, when I was a kid, I saw all sorts of citizen professionals, preachers, and as I'll say it in a minute, the citizenship schools were often in beauty parlors and barber shops as well as church basements, but teachers and preachers and many business people were all citizen teachers. But an unknown story and an extraordinary story that we build on is the story of Jean's teachers, a group of teachers who were all trained at historically Black colleges, learned the philosophy of what was called pedagogy, and the personalist philosophy that every person has a vast talent, a sacred talent in the views of those of us of faith, but just a vast talent that needs to be tapped. And Jean's teachers organized over 5,000 schools called Rosenwald schools for a fund that people could apply to for getting a portion. And they built thousands of libraries. And they also developed ways of working in a political way that anticipated the nonviolence of the movement. They were the foundation of the citizenship schools, which I want to talk about next briefly. So I worked for the citizenship education program of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The founder was a Septimer Clark. She had been a teacher in South Carolina, pushing back against and organizing parents and teachers for racial progress for 40 years before she started the citizenship schools out of Highlander Folk School in 1957. And she was an inspiration. And then she went over to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference when the citizenship school movement began to mushroom, and the Highlander couldn't really cope with the demand. Next. So Dorothy Cotton was my boss in the citizenship education program. She was a remarkable woman. She died a few years ago. We brought her to Humphrey to help us set up our center. And she said the goal of the citizenship schools was for people not to see themselves as victims, but to see themselves as citizens who were responsible for addressing the problems in communities. She had a song that she used to sing all the time, that we still sing through our youth initiative. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Nobody else is going to rescue us. We are the ones. And she thought that it was important to see government as us. We, the people, created government. It wasn't government out there doing things for us. Next slide. So we've worked with people in many different fields, both in higher education programs that prepare professionals, and also in communities. The nursing department at Augsburg is an example I want to highlight. So it had an old history of transcultural nursing, recognizing the wisdom of Native peoples and indigenous peoples around the world. And so for them, the idea of preparing citizen nurses who were able to think outside the box of their nursing skill set, although they were skilled nurses, and learning to act in a political way. And again, everyday politics. We're not talking about partisan politics. But the understanding of politics has shrunk too to be what politicians do. That isn't what the meaning of it was for 2,000 years. It was learning how to deal with people who were different. And it's negotiating and flourishing in public spaces, or what we call free spaces, where people learn how to deal with different kinds of people. Next. So one example of the nursing department at Augsburg has sponsored 3 commons where people, the nursing students, graduate students, undergraduate students, they don't wear their nursing garb. They work with people in a collaborative way, and they get some services, but they're much more collaborative and civic. But one of the graduates was Elizabeth Stolik, who worked in the intensive care unit at Mayo. I just did a course for the graduate students in the nursing program and was struck by how many working at Mayo. Stulik did a skill that we call power mapping that we use in all of our work. So it is about building a sense of civic muscle, but in a kind of molecular, everyday way. It's figuring out who to connect with and how to build power. So power is not given, it's built, and it involves strategic and political thinking. And Elizabeth did a great job of that. She talked to a lot of people who were immigrants, and she found that many of them couldn't speak English. And it was really crucial for Mayo's #1 staffing priority of patients coming first, that they be attentive to the cultural realities of people who were coming to Mayo. So she presented her findings, she publicized them, she met with leaders of Mayo, and they created a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, and she was the first chair of that, and it made measurable difference in engagement and interactions of immigrants and racial minorities with the Mayo Clinic. So just to summarize, Stacy, could you give me the last slide? So what is citizenship today? Well, we say it's not legalistic. I mean, it has a legal dimension, but that's all the political world focuses on. Vincent Harding, who I quoted before, said in a speech to the Children's Defense Fund in 2012, "I am a citizen of a nation that does not yet exist, full of generosity and equality and kindness, but it must exist." And that's our understanding. And the Black political theorist Melvin Rogers calls that aspirational citizenship. It was the heart of the freedom movement. In this understanding, citizen is not simply a voter or a volunteer, and not a consumer or a client or a victim alone. I mean, those are narrow identities. A citizen is a co-creator of a democratic way of life. And citizens do everyday politics. They push back against narrow understandings of their roles in institutions. They help revitalize the civic spirit of institutions. And their knowledge is on tap, not on top. So that's my PowerPoint that Monty asked for. It was good to put it together. I'm really not very versed in PowerPoints, but and my wife Mari says I always put too many words, but I summarized a little bit.
Here, you did great, and I think just kind of opening up, this moment that feels like there's a lot of weight to it is just kind of opening up our aperture to, we've traveled a long ways and, through some tough times before, and also to just help us to both rediscover and help us to reimagine what does it look like to see everybody's role as a role of community builder. And I think that at the heart of belonging civic muscle is helping people to see opportunities to contribute and to co-create. So hope that you can stay on tap with us as we start to
Sure.
delve into the community side of this.
We look forward to working with you, Monty.
Yeah, same here. So appreciate you being here. I think we have, I don't know if you want to take the slide down for a moment, Stacy, or if we just move to Mayor Chewy, who I think is really doing some interesting work, she and team, around what it looks like to build belonging and civic muscle and create the conditions for people who may not have always had the opportunities to thrive to really thrive. So, Mayor Chewy, would love to, invite you in to share a little bit of your local story.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. Monty, Veronica, John, Sarah, thank you. So I would like to talk a little about the work we're doing and how you can all be part of the belonging civic muscle we're doing today. Next. So a little bit about Unidos Nueva Alianza. Again, my name is Marichuy Alvizar, and I am the executive director and I'm one of the founders for Unidos Nueva Alianza. And our mission is, to protect and promote the rights of immigrants, Latinx, and marginalized communities. We'll work together with unrepresentative communities and their development and support through advocacy, education, and health. And our vision is to eliminate systematic injustice and create inclusive communities, which is why we're here today. Belonging is more than just, inclusion. It's about dignity, representation, and the ability to thrive. For immigrant, Latinx, and marginalized communities, true belonging means being able to live without fear, access to basic needs, and have a voice in shaping their futures. Civic muscle is the collective power of communities to organize, advocate, and take action. It grows when people have the tools, the knowledge, and confidence to make the change from neighborhood level to systems-wide policies. Next. So who are we? Unidos Nueva Alianza started as a community group back in 2019, when Grand County had the highest deportations in the whole state of Washington. And it's in Ephrata, and it was founded by 5 women with lived experiences. Some were separated by deportation. Some couldn't have access to healthcare. Others just, had the fear of, taking their kids to school or, going to work. So we all, came together and started in Grand County. But soon we were servicing surrounding towns like Othello and Adams County, Wenatchee and Chelan. And so we kind of grew our services, over to now service 8 counties, which is Central and Central Washington. Yeah. So some of the services, that we do, we have, notary services, digital navigation, workers and immigration's rights. We have our UNA pantry that consists of food and diapers and household essentials. We have health, which includes charity care, access to healthcare. We have health navigators, utility assistance, which is just during the winter time when most of our community members don't work due to weather. And then we have partnerships for immigration, where we have an immigration attorney here in our office, and then we partner to provide business classes around the 8 counties. So we have 4 goals and pillars, which is, food security, access to healthcare, digital equity, and immigration rights. Those challenges fostering these pillars is, exclusion from systems. Immigrant and Latinx communities are often denied full participation, whether it's healthcare, civic process, or digital access, due to structural barriers, language status, or discrimination. Our communities fear and mistrust. Why? Because of harsh immigration policies, disinformation, systematic racism, breed fear, making it harder to build trust in public systems or engage civically. Digital divide. Limited access to technology and internet connectivity keeps families from social services, education, and advocacy opportunities, especially in rural and underserved areas. And we have a lot of those rural underserved areas in North Central Washington. Food security and health disparities. When basic needs are met, people are forced to focus on survival over participation. It is hard to feel like you belong when you're struggling to feed your family or have access to a doctor. Next. So this is a little bit of what we do. So, we tend to meet our community. So we provide cultural relevant food to the communities that we serve. And this is just a little of the different rural areas that we serve. Next. So we deliver food, to rural towns, in Mattawa. We do, we help the homeless camps in Yakima, deliver water to Mapton, again, smaller rural towns. And then Othello, partnering with different organizations. Access to healthcare. I think this is probably one of the best things that we added to our community. When we started, we were really immigrant based, helping our community, making sure that they knew their rights, they feel safe. And, when COVID hit, we changed our programming to make sure that, again, it was, people belong and they were feeling inclusive. So we kind of changed, we added healthcare, we did charity care, and we trained health navigators to help enroll folks into Apple Health expansion. And I would like to share two stories next of our communities, here. So, and these are from North Central Washington. So this is a family, Doña Delia and her husband, they applied for qualified Apple Health expansion, which significantly improved access to their health care. Her husband was finally able to visit the dentist after many years, 25 to be exact, for a checkup, and she was able to receive follow-up care after her open heart surgery. Now they're receiving health care that they thought they would not ever be receiving after 27 years of being here in the United States. Next. And then so a single mother of three, she was diagnosed with cancer a few months before she was able to apply for Apple Health expansion. And sorry, for those that don't know what Apple Health expansion is. So in November 2023, Washington State passed where undocumented folks can apply for healthcare regardless of their status. And in July of last year, Washington was able to provide free access to a certain population of undocumented folks. So before she had coverage, she was barely making ends meet. She was paying for chemotherapy while also covering basic living expenses. And at times she felt she had to choose, keeping a head over her roof or, paying for her treatment. So Apple Health gave her the chance to keep fighting for her life and for her children. So this is why, we're doing the work that we're doing. This is why it's important to continue the work that we are doing. It's important to have community-led advocacy, supporting leadership from within immigrant and Latinx communities, ensure solutions are rooted in lived experiences and not outside assumptions. Building culturally and bilingual services, meeting people where they are in their language with respect for their culture builds trust and breaks down barriers. Health and digital access. Access to care and the internet isn't just about services, it's about empowerment, connection, and participation in civic life. Spaces for collective action. When community members come together around shared struggles, whether for immigrant rights, for justice, or broadband access, it builds both solidarity and momentum. So we are currently, some of our digital classes, and not only that, but we're also providing classes, Thriving Together, we're providing classes in Wenatchee. And this is just some of the work that we're doing, teaching in all those rural areas about digital access and providing the services that they need. And then we have our course, now with this administration, we're doing a lot of immigration, so teaching our community about their rights. Like I said, we have a partnership with different organizations to have in-house immigration attorneys, family law, and then know your rights. So we've done, a little tour. I call it a tour. We've been to multiple rural towns, providing know your rights trainings. And then just other events that we do, so we have many events that we do. Easter, we do CPR. So we just do what, again, to be back to school events. So belonging begins with meeting basic needs: food, healthcare, safety, access, and growth through collective action. Civic muscle is built when people are equipped and empowered to advocate for themselves and their communities. True equity requires rewriting the systems, the marginalized communities and underserved communities that work, and that the work must be led by those most affected. Building inclusive community isn't charity, it's justice, and it's about recognizing the power, contributions, and rights in every person, regardless of their origin or status. And then, yeah, it's a little bit about the work that we're doing and just, our contact information. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being with us, Mayor Chewy. That it's remarkable. I'm sure everybody else, like the breadth of the work that you all are doing with the small group is, just really extraordinary. And I personally, really appreciate how you're connecting the vital conditions and how you're expressing it better. I won't try to put your words back because they were so eloquent. And but this idea of making sure that people have access to the things that are keeping them from thriving, and then really equipping people with the skills to be able to co-create, to advocate, to organize, and to do that, I think is a really great example of belonging, civic muscle, and this kind of ethos of thriving together. So I know on the other side, there's probably some questions that people might have for Harry and Mayor Chewy. I encourage you to put those in the chat, and we can, on the other side of a small group breakout, talk a little bit more. But before we go to a little bit of some dialogue with everyone, we're lucky to have Nancy Warner, who I think many of you know, and going to talk a little bit around in this kind of moment when there's so much polarization. Nancy, you've been really committed to this in a lot of different ways. So I'd love for you to just to kind of tell your story, maybe your connection to the network, and to tell us a little bit about Braver Angels.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, nice to be with you all and to hear these stories. I look forward to the conversation. Before we get there, I did want to introduce you to Braver Angels, which is a national nonprofit that started in January 2017. And the mission is to bring Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. So I think the mission of Braver Angels goes back to what Harry was talking about, that everyone has responsibility for our democracy, and has a voice in it, and we need to learn how to use those voices again. Am I moving the slides forward, or are you going to do that for me, Stacy, or somebody? Okay, thank you. So this Braver Angels, as I said, is a national nonprofit, and a group of us that were working through the Interfaith Justice Coalition, which is a new organization in North Central Washington, we were working on a series of events called Our Shared Democracy last year at this time, and we had events through the summer and the fall last time. Mayor Chewy was involved in one of those events, which was a bilingual ballot education event. We had a forum with our county auditors to talk about how ballots are processed in an effort to increase understanding and faith in our democratic voting system. So we were looking around basically, and you'll see the flyer here on the left, our shared democracy. We worked with the Dispute Resolution Center, Faith Action Network, Thriving Together. NCW has been one of our partners from the get-go. Rural People's Voices, other organizations, but we basically were networking around this notion of who's doing work around the region to basically support our democracy, everything from human rights in a multi-party political system to political tolerance, democratic voting system, democratic governance, and citizen participation. So we found that there were quite a few events already going on. And when we saw a gap, we organized an event to help fill that gap. So in that process, we discovered that Braver Angels had some local in that Eastern Washington people that were doing work out here. So we reached out to Braver Angels. I think you could go to the next slide. We reached out to Braver Angels last year about this time, I guess, discovered them. Janice Dickinson is a Eastern Washington organizer who lives in Winthrop, and Emily Jacobs is in Ellensburg. And so we reached out to both of them to find out what's going on that we could plug into and how can we bring you here to introduce our community to this topic of depolarizing our country. And so we started with organizing a couple of presentations on Braver Angels and a little bit of try it on, have a conversation with someone that has a different opinion on something than you and have that be a productive conversation. So we had an event here in Wenatchee on September 30th in the library, where so far we've had all of our events. The libraries are a wonderful partner for all of this work, and we'll continue to work with them. But we had, if you'll go to the next slide, we had a full house. We ran out of chairs. There's an appetite for this work for good reason. We have such a polarized country, and people are exhausted by it, and they want to do something about it. And so Braver Angels is offering a whole wide variety of trainings, experiences, all over the nation, and much of it's online, so it's very accessible. But we wanted, getting people in the same room, eyeball to eyeball, is really what we aim to do a lot of with our local group that we're forming. So this was kind of a kickoff event. We had, as I said, the room was full. Steve Wright, who is one of our members of our planning team, and Kelly Allen, they both sort of emceed that evening, and we asked for people to sign up if they were interested in getting involved in organizing a local chapter. So we now have a planning group of about 10 of us that are working on this. And one thing about Braver Angels that we respect and are trying to emulate is that a lot of the events require a balance of conservatives and liberals. So reds and blues is a shorthand for that. And so we're trying to build our planning group to reflect that diversity so that we don't just, talk to each other and not move forward with more effective communication across perspectives. Next slide. So then so after the introduction to Braver Angels and people getting a taste for it and getting ourselves starting to get organized, we convened a workshop in February. And this is a photo of the group that participated in this. And this was a common ground workshop addressing immigration. So this was very structured in terms of we had 16 participants, 8 blue, 8 red. That comes to 16, doesn't it? So we had 16 participants, and then we had some people that were just there as observers and did not speak. And so it was the way this was structured is every person, every participant, every one of the 16 had a chance to share their view on the really big topic of immigration. And then we spent 5 hours looking for shared values, shared concerns, and shared points of agreement on how to resolve or move forward on immigration policy. So it's not a policy, we didn't walk out of there with policy suggestions, but we walked out of there with points of agreement that are shared with the National Braver Angels, and they're rolling up those agreements from workshops across the country to present to Congress. So it is, I think, kind of like what Harry was describing early on. It's like from community, from the ground up. Who's on tap, who's not on point, or not on top, I guess. Who's on tap, not on top. This is a kind of a grassroots effort to have a voice at a national level, this kind of workshop. But they're all different kinds of Braver Angels workshops, and we're fashioning using a model that's been used here in Snohomish County. We're organizing a forum in Chelan. So that next slide, if it was time to go there, you were right. We have a forum scheduled for May 29th at the Chelan Fire Station, and it will probably be on the topic of taxes and with a a state national, state mandated versus federal, and how do you resolve those things. So the actual topic is still taking shape. But the time and place, if you want to come to a Braver Angels event that's locally organized, that would be an opportunity. And if you just want to get on the mailing list, so you can hear about this and other things coming up, please contact us. The other thing that's even coming up sooner than the May Civic Forum will be tomorrow night. Actually, this slide is not correct. It's tomorrow night at 7:30. There's a Zoom meeting, the Eastern Washington Alliance, and the topic is executive orders. How have they been used? How are they being used now? So that's tomorrow night on a Zoom call at 7:30. That'll last about an hour and a half. And then if you want to find out, as many people do, more about Braver Angels, you can use this link right here to go right to their part of their website where you can figure out how to get started. And then at a more regional level, and when we say region, for North Central Washington, we're using the region that Thriving Together uses, that the North Central Regional Library uses, that Interfaith Justice Coalition. So it's Okanagan, Chelan, Douglas, and Grant County, and also Ferry County. We use Ferry County. So Janice Dickinson is a contact who works at the state level with Braver Angels and is pretty experienced with national programs. So she's much more informed than I am. I only became involved in the last year. But there's my contact information for those of you who I don't know yet. You can reach me. That's one way you can reach me. So that's all I brought. It was just kind of an introduction to Braver Angels and how we came to start working with them in our region. The rest of the story is to be determined by what we do.
Love that, Nancy. And on that note, just kind of the invitation of what a great resource Braver Angels is, and see some hands clapping for you. They were, just as an FYI, they were part of when we were creating the springboard for Thriving Together, Braver Angels was part of that. And of course, Harry's been very actively involved in the leadership of Braver Angels, not surprisingly.
Okay.
So really cool to kind of see what's kind of cooking up, recognize the number of the faces in that pic, including yours, John.
Yeah, John was there. Karen was there.
Karen, yeah. So yeah, we've heard a lot of ideas, a lot of seeds planted, seeding some ideas. So we'd love to just give an opportunity for you all in a little bit smaller groups to just connect for about 12 minutes. Sarah, I think you're going to set us up for that, and then we'll come up and have a chance to be in kind of shared dialogue. So I think Sarah's going to do her magic and put you into groups of 3, and I think we can put this, Stacey, in the chat, but just, wherever you'd like to take this, but what coming up for you that seems significant? Where are you seeing opportunities for, building belonging and civic muscle? And where do you see future opportunities? What's needed in terms of belonging and civic muscle here? So thanks for putting that in the chat, and we'll see you back in about 12 minutes.
Are you done?
Yeah, we thought we'd just take a few minutes to kind of hear a few ideas. Then going to pass it back over to Veronica and John to help land our time together. But yeah, just curious, what was bubbling up, in terms of what you heard. And again, we can hit at those, whatever you like. So we don't have to do a formal report out, but would love, a couple of different groups to kind of share what's bubbling up. Where you seen belonging to civic muscle getting built in some other areas? Where are the big opportunities? Who'd like to jump in?
Oh, I'll start. I got the opportunity to visit with Christina and Karen. And for me, one of the big takeaways was just how we were identifying with the civil rights movement and how we can learn from all of the history in civil rights and how, we're at this point today where we can learn from all of the things that were done and said and happened before. And now we can apply technology and connection and education to keep on moving.
Thanks, Jenny. Anything in particular that, to dip into kind of where you see the parallels of the civil rights or the particular skills or reimagining those skills and capacities?
I don't know if my co-room folks want to jump in. We talked specifically, Karen and I, about being a white ally and how to be relevant, and that it's not a box to tick, and that we continue to move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jenny. I think you summarized it really well.
Wonderful. And seeing Liz just jumping around here, just talking about the work of UNA. Wonder if you want to give voice to that and kind of the breadth of work. Or anybody else in that group? I think kind of.
Cool. Okay. I think I'm going to go to the hospital to get lunch today. Walk over
Well,
there.
you might need to mute,
I hope so too.
but it sounds delicious.
Yeah.
I was in that group, but just similar conversation with Jenny and Karen about like really lifting up, being part of a community to lift up voices and concerns and advocating together. And it doesn't necessarily mean you need to be part of the community members that are most effective, but doing it jointly together in support of each other. But also, I think there's that importance to also bring that back to the community and the communities that are also being affected. And, when we talk about some of the immigrant justice work, sometimes individuals don't know that the broader community is supporting them. And so there's still individuals might be in fear and be in hiding, and we might be out there advocating, in a completely different area, but no one knows that because of that fear. So how do we also not just demonstrate that ourselves, but how do we demonstrate that to the members we're trying to support in our community and being there for them in that way as well? Just thinking about like, it's easy to advocate, or I don't want to say it's easy to advocate, but sometimes you can turn around, you can advocate for it, but you need to be there next to the individuals that you're advocating for as well to demonstrate that solidarity and being part of that community, not just doing it in your own silo.
Yeah, thanks, John. Not just what we do, but how we do that and how we expressed solidarity and concern. And I love
how we do it together.
Yeah. Perfect. What else came up in your small group that had some energy?
This is Jerry Stanley, and I was delighted to speak with the young lady from UNA. I'm not going to pronounce her name because my tongue does not roll well, so I would not be correct in any way that I formatted it. But I was certainly interested in the way that she has done outreach in outlying communities. We're in Okanagan County and OMAC, and we have many little small communities around us. Our service group provides recovery support services to anyone as they define their own recovery. And so we're trying to expand out into the rural community and also educate the community that recovery doesn't always have to be with mental health or SUD, but there is many other forms of recovery that we may need support along the way. And so I was interested to listen to everybody today because I found a common thread that went through all the things that we did. We're all working mainly with a population that is similar in one way or another, and the common ground that we have, and we learn how to be a self-advocate for our programs that also would include all the other programs that provide services.
Thank you, Jerry.
I think that was kind of a common thread that we found as well, that leaning into other community partners and finding those ones that are trusted in the communities that are fearful, so that we can raise them up, really leaning on Cafe and the work that they do. The North Central Early Learning Coalition joins outreach events in all 4 northern counties, including Una. And we do that so that we can get those resources to children and families, and then partner with, health organizations, other nonprofits that can provide the services that we don't have available here, like Catholic Charities, or the funding to support. As we know, all funding is shifting at this moment, just keeping in mind who is available to provide those services and helping to connect those individuals in need.
Thank you. Lots of assets and lots of needs for connection. Harry, see your hand up.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate very much Nancy's comments, Nancy Warner on Braver Angels. And I wanted to mention that we've been involved in our own church, a very strong Braver Angels affiliate. It's been developing rural connections with conservative congregations in Western Minnesota. We're in St. Paul. But we also, I'm on the national group. I put it in the chat. This was kind of started by an article I wrote for National Civic Review called Return of the Citizen, pointing out that who's talking about citizens in the larger public discussion these days. And we've now developed something called the Civic Renewal Support Team, convened by Steve Sotwick, who was the Red co-founder of the field operation in Braver Angels. And we're developing a lot of resources for adding to dialogue action, adding action piece to dialogue. So how can people work on local problems, not be caught up in the kind of the inflamed national debates, although, issues like immigration have local dimensions as well. To have citizen-led problem solving is what we call it. And there's a email, but I can't remember. I think it's Civic Renewals CRST Braver Angels. But actually, the simplest way is to connect with Steve Sotwick, who is S. Sotwick at, I'm just putting that in the chat, braverangels. No, I think it's actually .org. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and we can make sure that gets out there to folks as we.
Yeah, so just Steve Sotwick he's kind of the coordinator of the communications. Well, several people are, but if you're interested in that piece of Braver Angels, and there are a number of case studies now that Braver Angels has been involved in catalyzing local projects, which are really inspiring, actually. You could get in touch with Steve.
Great. Thanks for that ad, Harry. And yeah, just kind of looking at the clock, I think as was mentioned a couple of times here, there is an appetite for this. I think it came up a couple of times for doing local work. The report that Stacy was referring to, In Common, which might be worth putting that report into, Stacy, that people are interested there. We feel paralyzed and helpless, and I think you all are already providing all types of opportunities for people to bridge together, to do some things that really count for their community, starting with people who maybe are on the margins, that have been marginalized in different ways, and how do we really step up and support each other at this time? So wondering, Veronica or John, if, I might throw it back your way.
Thank you, Monty. I'm wondering if either Stacy or Sarah could bring up that last slide for a quick preview of what's ahead for the rest of the year in terms of this learning series and another great opportunity coming in October. Next slide. All right, so we kicked off the learning series with focusing on belonging and civic muscle today. In May, we will highlight food as a multi-solver. July and September, we'll dive into the tribal learning journey and thriving natural world, which is another one of our 7 vital conditions. And then in October, we have planned for our 2nd annual Thriving Together Summit. So stay tuned for that. And I believe the next slide is just thank you all for joining us. And I will hand it over to John if you have anything else to add last minute.
Well, I want to just thank Carrie, Mary Tree, and Nancy for being willing to present the work you're all doing. I'd also just encourage others, if you know similar work occurring in the region and organizations that are really leaning into this kind of work, this is really the core of that vital conditions network and focus. And the more we can continue to build all of this and move along, I think the more we can really create a space and a community of belonging and engagement. And so this is a great starting group, great conversation. I would always encourage others to expand further. If you're interested in any of the topics or programs, I encourage you to continue to reach out and learn more about both of them. Again, thank you all for the space and the time, and hope you can join us in future conversations and endeavors.
And I just want to mention that the recording of this will be sent out at the end of this week, along with a special report using our vital conditions data to just really highlight some of our data around belonging and civic muscle. So a little resource for you that will be sent out at the end of the week. So thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.